Live from the Buzzard Auditorium on the campus of Eastern Illinois University, it's Issues and Attitudes.
Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Issues and Attitudes, a town hall meeting just for you to ask certain questions and serious questions about a serious topic. I'm your host and moderator tonight, Dr. Janice Collins. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming. The earthquake in Japan has reminded us all that disaster can strike us at any time and in many ways that we can hardly imagine. And while we in Central Illinois may not be at risk for a tsunami, we do share one thing in common with our friends in Japan. We depend on nuclear power to generate a substantial portion of our electrical power. And with the benefits, there comes risks. According to the Nuclear Energy Institute, almost 48% of Illinois' electricity is generated by nuclear power. Illinois is home to 10 active nuclear power plants, with at least 4 with the same design as the Fukushima plant that was damaged by the earthquake, tsunami, and the power outage that resulted. Most of the plants operate in the northern portion of the state, but on the Clinton, as far as the Clinton nuclear power plant that's located less than 80 miles away from Charleston, and it must be noted though that however it's 80 miles away from Charleston, it does not have the same design as the Fukushima plants. We are here tonight to discuss what are the realistic risks of a radiation release from a nuclear power plant in Illinois, and are we prepared to handle the emergency that could result. Joining me to help facilitate this conversation and to help answer your questions, we are joined by Mr. Jonathan Munkin, the director of the Illinois Emergency Management Agency, and the IEMA, with the director of the IEMA that he works for, is the agency responsible for coordinating the state's emergency response for a wide assortment of potential situations. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Stephen Daniels, chair of the physics department and full professor at Eastern Illinois University, who's well versed in how nuclear power is generated and the effects that radiation can have on humans and the environment. We want to thank you graciously for agreeing to assist us at the last minute. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Cameron Craig is a well-known geology professor at Eastern Illinois University who is an expert on weather and the environment. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And then finally, we also like to welcome in our audience, Mr. Pat Goodwin, the Charleston Fire Chief and the person responsible for developing and overseeing the city's emergency response team. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to us all. Let's go ahead and get started. This is a huge topic. I guess I first want to ask, the first question is, well, I could ask, are we safe? But to make sure that we have an understanding, can you describe, just for the audience and for the listeners and the viewers, how the Fukushima plant was designed and how the problem evolved, so we're all on the same page before we begin the discussion?
Sure. Yeah, basically what we've seen, and information is limited, unfortunately, as far as how much detail we're getting from Japan at this point to find out exactly what the significant damage was, what the critical damage was that ultimately caused it. But as you mentioned, there are some similarities in the designs. Really what you're looking at is just the intercontainment facility is what's similar, which is the GE Mark I. So the overall plant itself, there are actually some very significant differences. Ultimately, over the course of the last 30 or 40 years that these nuclear power plants in Illinois have been operational, there have been significant upgrades that have been made to the facilities, multiple alterations and expansions that have happened that have really changed the system here that you would find in the plants as compared to what you saw in Japan. But ultimately, based on the information that we have available, what we've seen is that it really wasn't the earthquake that ultimately caused the situation that they have at the Fukushima plant. It actually withstood that earthquake fairly well. Ultimately, the problem was the follow-on tsunami, as you mentioned before. Now, obviously, the magnitude of both instances, both emergencies, was far beyond anything that they had planned on. But ultimately, what the tsunami did was it knocked out the backup power supplies to the plant. As ironic as this sounds, a nuclear power plant needs electricity in order to function. So it cannot run by itself. Yeah. So ultimately what happened is the system shut down by itself as it's supposed to do. So the reactor shut itself down in response to the initial earthquake. Ultimately what happened is when the tsunami came in, a 40-foot tidal wave basically wiped out their backup diesel generators. And that's something that all the power plants in the state of Illinois have, is you have a redundant backup diesel generating system to make sure that the plant never fully loses power. Well, in this case, it actually knocked out all of the backup power, and arguably just as significant, it knocked out all of the backup fuel. Whereas in Illinois, we have all of our fuel, basically the diesel fuel is stored underground. There it was stored above ground, and when the tsunami came in, it knocked out the generators and all of the fuel, and they were ultimately unable to restore power directly to the plant in order to get the coolant flowing through what's called the spent fuel pool. So after the uranium rods are used for power generation, they're removed from the core and placed in what's called a spent fuel pool. That's incredibly hot, and as it happens, that a really, really unfortunate timing is those spent fuel rods had just been removed within months of this disaster happening, and those take somewhere between 12 and 15 years to cool down. So they'd only been out for a couple of months. If you can't get coolant through the spent fuel pool, that's actually where we're getting the radiation from, not the inner core, but these spent rods that were already used for electricity.
Okay, and thank you for that explanation. When spinning off of that, just the last part of the radiation, talk a little bit about the effects of the radiation, containing the radiation, because at the very beginning when it first happened, the reports were, we don't have to worry about it. We're all the way in Illinois, but we're starting to see, we've already seen the creeping in of certain elements of radiation in our water, in our plants, in our air supply. Can you tell me a little bit about radiation, what that means, but also what does that mean for our environment and for the humans here?
Well,
you and then
go ahead.
And then you, sir. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Daniels.
Radiation, the deal is that we get radiation all the time. It's coming from cosmic rays, it's coming from background in the soil, it's coming from everywhere. We get a little bit all the time. But nonetheless, the sense is that any radiation is still going to harm the body. It has some damage to cells almost no matter what. So the question is, how much can you take? When we're talking about these trace amounts, we're talking about amounts that are lower than the background or basically around the background level. We're not talking about amounts that are going to be significantly dangerous. However, if the coolant and the waste fuel, that stuff is very hot. That is hot enough that it would be significant danger to a person right there. But here we are halfway around the world. It's going to be much dilute by the time it gets here, if any of it. I mean, since even though it has gotten here, it's much lower level. So the danger to humans at this point is probably pretty low.
Okay.
At least in Illinois.
Okay, so that's good. That's good. Yes,
and
Professor.
Talk about the atmospheric concepts here. That Fukushima, it creates its own heat, and so it creates its own low pressure, and so all that radiation gets up into the upper atmosphere and is carried by the jet stream over North America, and over time it is dispersed. I mean, it's dispersed, so it's not as concentrated. So it does eventually fall from the sky. It's like, we have dust storms in the Great Plains. The dust gets picked up, carried by the jet stream, and lands here in the Midwest. So it's the same kind of thing, but in minute, it's very traceable.
Okay. Yes, sir.
And if I may add to that, ultimately, what we found is obviously we have a detection system throughout the state of Illinois that ultimately, that's how we identify, and we take these samples on a regular basis, whether there's a disaster globally or not. In this particular case, what we've identified is an isotope that's iodine-131. And iodine-131 is not, it obviously in large quantities or heavy doses or things like that, it's 10% gamma, and gamma is what you need to be concerned with. Ultimately, that's where you have the biggest risk involved. But what we've detected here, as you mentioned, we've detected it on grass, we've detected it in the air. What we've detected is more than 2,000 times below the level at which there would be any amount of concern.
Okay.
And ultimately, as an isotope, it only has a half-life of 8 days, which is good because it's not really persistent. It's something that'll go away fairly quickly.
Okay, and so then are you saying that we don't, because it's so small and it's diluted in its travel, we don't have to worry about these levels rising?